Wally's, a guitar store. I was hired about a year before this happened and was a full-time electric guitar teacher at the time. I loved it. I got into it about 7 years ago, and I loved the ability to teach more people about it. So, to say the least, I definitely didn't hate my job. When you schedule an appointment, you get about 3 weeks of lessons, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I saw this one man in the system. It said he made an appointment for tomorrow. It was just Sunday for reference. His name was Bobby Frey. So the next day, after my 2 p.m. lesson, I had this Bobby next. When I was at the counter waiting for the appointment, I saw this guy come in. He seemed pretty tall and was wearing a camo jacket with dirty jeans. I couldn't really gauge his personality, but he didn't seem the friendliest. So I asked him, "Are you Bobby?" He said something like, "Oh yeah, that's me. Are you Jesse?" This was very strange to me. It does show who your instructor will be when you sign up online, but I never thought anyone would actually take the time to look at that stuff. He had actually remembered my name and intentionally looked at it. Maybe I was making too much of it, but we headed to the guitars for him to pick for the lesson. I told him he could choose whatever one he wanted. Then I remember him saying something like, "You choose for me. Go ahead, you probably know what's right." This was odd because one of the fun parts is choosing your own guitar. This guy was setting off some alarms, and I didn't like it. So we went over to our room, and I asked him some questions about guitars and how much of a beginner he was. Whenever I spoke or said something, he always seemed to give me that look as if he were just staring at me, not listening to anything I was saying. That's exactly what this guy was doing. Throughout the lesson, this guy seemed much more focused on me than on playing the guitar. But he was full of it. After every lesson, he would ask me things like, "Where are you from? How old are you?" And he even went as far as to ask, "Where do you live?" This happened every day. I always answered with some vague response, but I never confronted him. We'd been doing lessons for about 5 days now, and it was Friday of the following week. The lesson started off completely normal. He did all the same stuff. After the lesson was over, I was very excited because I was going out with some friends that night. We went to this place, I can't recall the name, but it involved drinking, and afterward, you had to play a certain game. It sounds kind of silly, but we had fun. It was very late now, probably around 11 p.m. We all left the place and went our separate ways, but while I was driving home, I noticed one car had been behind me for about 8 to 10 minutes since we left. Now, don't get me wrong, it was hard to tell because there weren't a lot of streetlights around, but I had a feeling. I pulled into my driveway, and this car was still behind me. Once I pulled in, the car was maybe 100 yards away from me as I got out. But as it passed me, I felt like throwing up. My legs felt weak. I was positive that this was the same guy from my lesson. The car slammed on the brakes as it saw me. He stopped in the middle of the road and got out of the car. In that moment, I knew it was him. He started sprinting at me, wearing the same camo jacket. I ran, tripping, and managed to get to my house, quickly going inside and slamming the door. I locked it, and then I heard a huge bang against the door and saw the knob twisting as he tried to get in. One of the most horrifying things I heard was him screaming right at my door, as if his mouth was pressed against it. He was yelling, "Get the F out here. I'm going to kill you. Get your stupid ass out here." I was terrified for my life as I sat holding the door back. He was banging on the door so hard it was terrifying. The door flexed with every bang. I hurried and grabbed my phone to call the police. They arrived in about 10 minutes and yelled at the guy to get the F over here. The banging stopped, and he went to the cops. I looked out my window and saw them arresting him. One of the cops came up to the door and asked me some questions. I mentioned that he was my student at the guitar store and was a very strange man. The next day, when I looked at my door, I saw deep scratches on it, almost like knife marks. The door was bent from how hard he was hitting it. A couple of days later, the police gave me a report on the guy. As I read it, I found out that the man was a 42-year-old ex-Marine and had been charged with first and second-degree murder. I was shocked when I also saw he had a kidnapping charge. This was no student. This was a serious convict. The man was sentenced to 20 years in prison. I know I'll be out of this house in 20 years.
But he'll still be out there, he